let's focus on relative pronouns. So, thinking back to last week, yes, we were talking about evidence statements, how to cite evidence. And then, if we were to go way before that, last Monday we were learning about possessive adjectives and pronouns. So, now we're talking about relative pronouns. So, 8 kinds of pronouns, this is another. Please take notes as you listen. Relative pronouns connect clauses or phrases to a noun or pronoun. So, if you're wondering what is a clause, I don't even know why I would need a relative pronoun because I don't know what a clause needs to be connected for. A clause is a part of a sentence that has its own subject and verb. I'll give you examples like, okay, the student who failed the exam was lazy, but you could break that down into the student was lazy and the student failed the exam, right? So that's like two different ideas or clauses. The student failed the exam, the student was lazy. And then you would connect it using the relative pronoun who. The student who failed the exam was lazy. So just to kind of focus on this part again, these are the relative pronouns. You don't need to memorize them, but just so you know, who and whom, which we talked about last week, like we use who for when it's a subject and whom for object. And then which and whichever, whoever and whomever, and then that. All right, so those are our relative pronouns. So why is this how it is? You might be thinking, like, why couldn't you just say the student was lazy? They failed the exam. It's to make more interesting, more complex sentence structure. So here, the relative pronoun links the noun, the student, to the phrase, failed the exam, right? Because it would sound kind of low elementary grade if you just said the student was lazy, the student failed the exam. Like, why repeat it? That's why it's a pronoun, because it's replacing saying the student over and over again. The student who failed the exam was lazy. This might be problematic, but we'll just take it for an example. All right. So we can often join two independent clauses with a relative pronoun. So again, to show you examples of what do I mean by independent clause, this is the man, he saved my life. So that's two sentences, but we can also use them as two independent clauses. So this is the man who saved my life. So the reason why we know these are independent clauses joined by a relative pronoun is that we can identify two verbs here, right? Here's a verb, is. That's a linking verb. And then we have saved. So this is the man. He saved my life. This is the man who saved my life. All right, let's go to the next one. Maybe. Okay. We can often join two independent clauses with relative pronoun. Another example. Ben won the race and he was given a medal. So here we can see that and a conjunction, different part of speech. We'll talk about that another time. But that's connecting those two independent clauses, or you can think of it as combining sentences. Ben won the race and he was given a medal. Or we can take it a step further, make the structure more complex, and say Ben, who won the race, was given a medal. What's the value of that? Because it's using this like as context building, right? Like we can say Ben was given the medal. And why was he given the medal? Because he is the one who won the race. So here we go. Here's a little bit more explanation. This is often a more interesting and varied way of constructing sentences. It helps prevent against the overusage of conjunctions. Conjunctions is and, or, and but, right? Like, we don't want all our sentences to sound the same. Why? Because for the same reason that you probably don't want to eat the same thing for lunch every day, that you don't want to go to the same restaurant every time you go out, because variety is the spice of life. And so we don't want every sentence to sound the same. Ben run the race and blah, blah, blah. I am hungry and I want a snack, right? So instead, that's one of the values of relative pronouns, is it can make our writing a little bit more sophisticated. Okay, so more examples. This is the cake that my mother made. The student who writes the best essay will win the prize. That chair which he is sitting on needs to be fixed. I will read whichever essay I receive first. So, chair and which. If you're wondering, well, like, when do I use who versus when do I use which? It has to do whether the subject of your sentence, the thing that you're replacing with a relative pronoun, is it a person or is it a thing, right? So like that chair, which, right? I'm not going to say that chair who he is sitting on, because the chair is not a person, right? And in like manner, the student who writes the best essay, I'm not going to say the student that writes the best essay, because that, you don't use that for a human. You use it for like an object. This is the cake that my mother made. You wouldn't say this is the cake who my mother made, because that just sounds weird. Generally, if you're using which, then it's going to require a comma to set off that phrase. Whereas, like, if you're using a relative pronoun for an object like cake or chair, that doesn't require a comma, right? This is the cake that my mother made. Otherwise, I could say something like the cake which my mother made, comma, is really tasty. So, right? Or, if I wanted to change that to that, I would say the chair that he is sitting on needs to be fixed. And then I will read whichever essay I receive first. All right. So here is something for you to do in your notebook. We'll go over it in a second, but pretty much we're going to like pause this video. I'm going to give you a few minutes, or if you are working independently, give yourself a few minutes to try to use relative pronouns to connect the following sets of sentences, and then we'll check our work. So, number 1, you could just call this like number 1, 2, and 3. All right, so there you go. You're going to write these number 1, number 2, number 3. Now, let's work smarter, not harder. Let's not take so long on this, because we'll have more practice in the worksheet. So don't copy down these short sentences. Just write the number 1, 2, and 3, and then write however you're going to combine these. So remember, the focus is, okay, so this is like really good for noticing like details, noticing things that are in common, right? Like, so Jim ate the pie, he is my brother. So what's the repeated like person or thing in these two sentences? It's about Jim, and Jim is my brother. Jim is the brother of the person who wrote the sentence, right? Okay. Or this one, I voted for Mr. Hall, he is my teacher. So Mr. Hall being my teacher, that's the common ground that you want to combine, that you want to connect using a relative pronoun. So hint for you, Jim, right, and Mr. Hall, those are both human, so you would probably be using who, not which, right? Okay, and then let's see this one. She lost Susie's watch. Susie was her best friend. So again, Susie with two different spellings. Oops. Susie is the common thread, the connection between those two sentences. So now go ahead and pause this and just do your best. Give it a try using relative pronouns to connect and combine these 3 sentences. Okay, so let's check it out. All right. First one, Jim, who is my brother, ate the pie. So Jim is my brother. So then we move that over in the middle, sandwich it. Got to use 2 commas to set off that independent clause, and then ate the pie. So we can see Jim ate the pie, and then Jim, who is my brother. Okay, next one. I voted for Mr. Hall, who is my teacher. Because it would be really weird if you use that same construction. You wouldn't be like, Mr. Hall, who is my teacher, I voted for. Like, no. Why is it different? Because in this one, Jim is the subject of the sentence. Jim ate the pie. Jim is my brother. Whereas this one, Mr. Hall is the object. Like, who did I vote for? I voted for him. I voted for Mr. Hall. So that's why it's going in a different way. I voted for Mr. Hall, who is my teacher. All right. And then finally, Susie, whose watch she lost was her best friend. It's very vague, right? Because all we have is this personal pronoun, she. We don't know who she is. We just know that that Susie was her best friend, and she lost Susie's watch. So then this time we're going, Susie was her best friend. Susie, whose watch she lost, was her best friend. So it's kind of fun. Think of this as like really creative collaging. So maybe you put it together in a different way, but this are probably the most logical ways to do so. All right, and then now it's going to be time for you to grab a worksheet. The worksheet is going to look like, hold up, like this. And you are going to work on this on your own. Shakespeare, who is the world's greatest playwright, was born in 1564 and died in 1616. All right. And then you can even see, just remember, like as you're working on this in the classroom and also independently finishing this up, you can see a list of all those relative pronouns like repeated over and over again on the top of this little thing. So who, whom, whoever, whomever, which, whichever, and that. All right, you got it. Relative pronouns.